I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded today, the Wiradjuri people, my people. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge our elders, past, those that watch over, guide and protect us, present, those that walk beside us, nurture and teach us the way, and future, the young ones that will succeed us into the future. I would like to acknowledge our continued connection to the lands, the waterways, and the skies, our animals, plants, and fauna. I would like to acknowledge our history. In story, song, and dance, we continue to share these stories. I would like to acknowledge each and every one of you. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which you tune into today, where you sit, where you live, where you work, and where you play, and how important it is for us to acknowledge where we are at this very moment. Mandangu, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny, host of It's Not About the Money, and this episode is part 2 of a conversation with Lacey Filipich, former chemical engineer turned financial educator. Lacey recently joined FinTech Maslow as head of financial wellness, but for several years has run her own business called Money School, as well as writing an award-winning book of the same name. In our conversation today, Lacey and I talk about her experience supporting kidpreneurs through her Maker Kids Club program and why it's so important for kids to build financial knowledge and understanding and skills, along with some tips of how to teach the kids in your life about money. Lacey joins us from Wundandi Land in southwest Western Australia, which is part of the Noongar Nation. Hi, Lacey. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about why it's not about the money. When I first came across your work, it was in the context of the Maker Kids Club. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and the inspiration for it?
Yeah, I'd love talking about this bit. It's one of the bits that's so much fun. And it's really easy to get out of bed in the morning when you do this kind of work. With Money School, I wanted parents to be teaching their kids about money, right? And my theory with that was that so much of the maths around money is straightforward and simple. If you could get through year 5 maths, you'd be okay with money maths for most of us. The real intricacy is around the values and the beliefs and the ethics. And that's not an easy subject to learn at school in a classroom situation because everyone's personal identity is different. I actually kind of think maybe financial education fits into ethics better than it does in finance sometimes. But at the moment, the best place to learn, I believe, is from your family, the same way you learn a lot of the values that we learn, things like manners as well, some of those basics. And so I really wanted parents to be empowered. And because they hadn't had great financial educations, a lot of that was about getting them skilled up and then helping them pass on those skills. But one of the things that happened through that, a lot of people would say to me, can't you just teach my kids directly? And I would say, no, it's not about my values. It's about your values and your beliefs. And it's not a copy and paste exercise. And I really wanted them to be involved. But after a few years of doing that, I teach the parents not to just give kids lots of money for nothing. I do think there's got to be some sort of exchange at some point, not at every age, but at some point, some sort of exchange of effort for reward or outcomes for reward. They're two different things, but
very much,
and that's a values thing, right? So do you reward the output or do you reward the amount of time that went in? So even that's sort of, an intricacy and not every family is the same. Anyway, I'm kind of digressing, but I tell the parents, don't give them lots of money for nothing, have an outcome or an effort associated with some of it. And then with these kids that were just going, well, I want more money. And so I had this phone call from one of the parents, Kat, and her daughter had needed some help. She had started a business. And so her 10-year-old daughter, Ash, gets on the phone with me and I said, oh, Ash, so what are you up to? And she said, I just wondered, I'm making lip balm. Do I need any kind of insurance for that? And I was like, wow, that's a sophisticated question in my head. And I said, oh, well, technically it's a therapeutic good. So you should be looking at therapeutic goods and finding out what's associated with that. I'm not an expert in that area, but that's what you want to, that's the term to search for. She's like, okay, great. And how do I get to markets? Like, how do I go into, those markets that you see at the local school or whatever? How do I get to them? And I was like, oh, well, they generally have an application and a fee. And it's like, Ash, what's this about? And she's like, well, I've been selling my lip balm to the local ladies at church and I've made $3,000.
Wow.
So she's
There's
10,
a little
right?
entrepreneur.
Exactly. And I was like picked my jaw up off the ground. Like, wow, Ash, that's amazing. And she had decided she wanted to do this to raise money to convert English books into the Lao language because kids in Lao don't get books to learn from. I was like, oh my gosh. So wow, this is incredible. You're amazing. Like, let's support you. So I went looking for how I could support her. And unfortunately, there wasn't much around in entrepreneurial education in 2016. It wasn't really widespread. The only group I could find is now called the Anthropolis. And all they could do was send a backpack for $25 with some worksheets in it. They didn't have any local educators. They didn't have any markets or anything. And when I asked them about it, they just didn't have a plan to come over to Western Australia over here. And I was like, oh gosh, what are we going to do? And meanwhile, Ash is telling her family and her friends. And it turns out being a kidpreneur, as we would call it, is contagious. There were kids everywhere starting businesses. And I'd mention it to family friends and suddenly their kids would start businesses. And of course, they had lots of questions. And so the first thing I did was like, well, I've got quite a few kids here interested. I'll put on a market for them. So I hired a local, yacht club had a really cool room. So we just put on a market and there were 12 stalls. And these kids were coming in with their things that they made, the lip balm, and someone had made affirmation cards, and there was plaster of Paris, and there was clay, and there was all sorts of stuff. And it turned out they needed a bit of help. So I started teaching them. And what I noticed was when I was teaching them about this, because it was their first time earning real money, not money that mum and dad had given you, not birthday money, not like a token $2 for emptying the dishwasher. They really got it. So when I got them to go, okay, well, how much have you made? What's your revenue? And how much did you spend? Because, of course, lip balm had costs, so does clay and paint and all those things. Take that away. Now I want you to think about how many hours you did to do this, and to work out the hours. And I go, right, so we're going to take your profit, which is, the income minus expenses, and divide that by the number of hours. And they'd go, oh, I made 52 cents an hour. And I'd be like, wow. And then they really value the money and they save it. So I saw these kids, they were saving at least 20%. Sometimes they were saving half, which is what I did when I was their age, or more of their profit. And I was like, wow, this is like a silver bullet for financial capability. These kids really get saving now. And for me, in primary school, if I can teach them to save, the rest can come later. We just have to get that habit of, what comes in has to be bigger than what goes out, and you've got to put some money aside for the future. If we can get that across in primary school, everything else is easier later on because they have some capital and they've got a buffer. So that's what I'm really focused on with that. So it was after that a friend went, oh, would you do that in schools? And so in 2017, I ran a pilot program with 86 kids at Riverton Primary. And same thing, I got them to measure how much they were saving before. Tell me, what are you saving? And less than a fifth of them were saving. They were getting money in and it was going out. It was very interesting demographic, 60% immigrants. Huge variety of people with family businesses and stuff. And so any money went back into the family, things like that, very different from the traditional Anglo-Saxon view of it's mine, it's yours, I keep mine. And so really interesting pilot place. But the same thing happened. They finished the 10-week program, they did their launch, they did their calculation, and 85% of them were saving at least 20% of what they made afterwards.
That's brilliant.
And I was like, oh, I've been looking for something that works. Everything that you teach kids, if you don't do it in a way that's tangible to them, hands-on, then, and I'm going to be very specific here, it doesn't have to be cash, okay? So people get hung up on cash. That's not what I mean. This idea of exchanging their time and energy for money and then what you do with that money afterwards, it just seems so effective. So I ended up teaching kids that program. I ended up creating a program called Maker Kids, which is actually an entrepreneurship program. So I promoted it to schools and families as I'm going to help kids learn skills for the future, which they do. They learn commercial acumen, and they learn, to talk to people, which is huge for that sort of age group. Sometimes there's a lot of shy kids out there who struggle to talk to adults, and you see them come out of their shell. But the hidden covert part of it is financial capability. I'm only really doing it because I want them to be able to understand the importance of money, money coming in, money going out, and why you need to save. And so that's been probably one of my favorite projects that I've run for several years now. And I just love hearing the stories of the kids and the things they come up with. They don't stay entrepreneurs forever. They grow out of it. They get bored, but those skills will get them through their adulthood, and that understanding of money coming in and out, and then the difference being what you can save, that if that stays with them, then it's a huge benefit for them.
The other interesting thing is it also teaches them that autonomy, that they can be in control of their earning, of their financial decisions. And that's a really important skill for kids to learn when they're young, because then that flows through in life. Do you keep in touch with any of those early kids from, like, where have those kids that did the program initially, where have they ended up? Have you followed them at all? What are they doing? Are they making good money decisions now?
Yeah, well, I particularly stay in touch through social media with a lot of the kids that came through the private program. So we had a lot of homeschoolers, families at home who wanted something like this for their kids, and a lot of individual families who signed up. So I haven't kept track of what happens with the school kids as much, but those families I have. And, I take, for example, Ash. Ash is 18 now. Oh, my God. And I saw a post the other day, her younger sister, Jewel, who came to the market and sat on the stall with her. And I've got this cute photo of Jewel when she's like 6 sitting there next to Ash, being part of it all. Just did her first paid gig singing at a wedding and got paid $500.
Brilliant.
Now, her mum is a singer and does that sort of stuff. So she's grown up around that, and it's a really entrepreneurial family, but it's like it's contagious. So I've just seen like the younger sister who was kind of peripheral to it, finding her entrepreneurial outlet. And I, like you say, life has changed a lot. We're not all going to have these reliable jobs with wages. We will all have to be a bit more entrepreneurial. We might have multiple jobs. We might be more on a service-based, multiple clients kind of thing rather than one employer. And so I feel like those skills that they're picking up are going to be really important in that changing world of work that our kids are encountering now.
Even if they're not going on to start their own businesses, they might be working in startups. They might be going in. We talk a lot about intrapreneurship, being an entrepreneurial employee and being able to bring that innovation and creativity, those future work skills that are so much more important than I think we've recognised in the past. So Absolutely. It sounds like it's a great foundation for that.
Yeah, I hope so. And I feel like if we can just have an experiential thing for these kids, something where they get hands-on, it sticks in their mind. I still think about my first business that I started when I was in year 6 doing hair wraps. And I did that because we had a school fete.
Yes.
Not because it was a program. I was just like, I'd like to do it. I ended up with 5 of my friends on the stall with me doing these hair wraps all day. That has actually, when people said to me when I quit my job in mining, what are you going to do? And I was like, I think, I'm going to start money school. I'm going to start, it was, now it's called money school. I was like, I think I'm going to teach people money. And they're like, run your own business. Really? Isn't that a bit scary? And I was like, nah, mate, it's straightforward. Money comes in, money goes out. You have to make the difference, work for you, and you have to add value, and you have to talk to customers. That's kind of business in a nutshell. But having had that experience just made me feel like, oh, no, I can do this. I've done this before, Of course, it's a lot more difficult and complicated. That's all right. The general principles,
a few more balls to juggle and things to consider.
Yes.
But opening that idea of possibility, I think, often one of the things about education, and I've been in the system as a teacher, is this idea that the modern education system is built on the idea of the factory model, where we were preparing workers to go in and to work for other people. But that's definitely not the world that we live in now. And we do need to be equipping kids for jobs that don't even exist, for industries that are yet to evolve. And there is a whole set of skills that go along with that that's going to set them up to be able to succeed. And what they learn when they're younger is pivotal to that.
And building that confidence. I really feel like a lot of my success has been a result of the confidence that I've built from trying these small, low consequence, like if it completely imploded, that little business that I started, it wouldn't have made a big difference to my financial outcomes. But the learning I got from it, that confidence that's come from it has just been pivotal for me to be able to feel like I can still do anything. I can still try anything. We can find a solution for this problem that we encounter, that it's doable. It's a really important skill for kids, I think, so that they don't feel that overwhelm. It's natural that they would feel overwhelmed, more confused in this much less certain environment. So the more they can feel self-reliant, I think the better it's going to be for them.
And interesting, those problem-solving skills that you developed when you were younger, which you then used when you went and did your study and that you're still using on an ongoing basis. So
I do feel like that's happened. I feel like everything I've done, every bit of study, every bit of learning has just made what I do now easier or more effective. I look, sometimes I go, oh, that's what this was all for. Me learning these incredible problem-solving methodologies and learning about design thinking and systems thinking and getting into Lean and Six Sigma and how to make more out of the things that we've got, how to squeeze more productivity. That's all I do now as well, and it makes me a bit different from some other financial educators because I'm not coming from the traditional finance view. But yeah,
yes.
that portfolio of skills, I feel like if you can work out ways to combine them, that's where the magic is for finding something that you love to do. So I hope the kids that hear this find that opportunity.
I think also you're reflecting a growth mindset too. We hear that as a buzzword a lot, but that idea that we can always continue to grow, we can always learn new things, that it is never too late to acquire new knowledge and skills and to give it a go. We know that we become less creative as we get older because it's taught out of us. Kids are some of the most creative and innovative people, and that's almost taught out of us. But also that idea of being able to take risks. And I don't mean risks as in dangerous things, but things that are a bit outside the box. Sometimes we get very comfortable in our comfort zone, and to be able to step beyond that, whether that's sometimes a life event that triggers us to get out, that pushes us out of our comfort zone, I think that can make a real difference to encourage people, kids, to give things a go, because what have you got to lose?
Exactly. And I think that being comfortable being bold with reversible decisions is the technical sort of definition. Because, of course, I come from engineering and mining. It's very risk averse, necessarily so, because you can kill people doing it. So you have to be really risk averse. And anyone who works in those technical or high risk jobs, they develop this innate, we must not take risk. And that is built into you from schooling as well in some places, don't climb that tree and break your arm because we don't want to have a broken arm. So no steps over 50 centimeters high, that was a thing in schools for a while. But that means, if it's not going to kill you, it's not going to really, damage your future prospects. And particularly if it's a reversible decision. So that's what I think a lot with this, how are you going to earn money, what jobs are you going to do? A lot of it's reversible. You do it for a few years, you don't like it. So what? You try something else. You take those skills somewhere else. Those are reversible decisions. It's not a case these days of you pick your career and that's it, you're in there for 50 years. So helping kids feel that confidence and experience it and that change of mind. That's why I don't worry whenever I see kids moving off into different jobs or ending their business. It's not a problem as far as I'm concerned. It's a natural progression.
I love that phrase, be bold with reversible decisions.
Annie Duke, I think she's got a great book. I think that's I've probably copy pasted it wrong, but that is where it's come from. So how to make decisions basically is her stuff. Annie Duke, she's fantastic. Follow her.
Come back to something that you mentioned when you were talking about kids. We know that with any life skills, kids start growing their knowledge and building their skills about money and financial decision-making from a young age. And that happens whether we as parents and caregivers and adults in kids' lives, whether we're conscious of it or not, it happens. They just pick up the good and they pick up the bad as well. And from my academic research, we know that parents and caregivers want to be able to instill good money habits in kids. But in the absence of knowing how to do that, explicit modelling that we've received, then we often fall into a kind of default parenting where we have great intentions, but sometimes not necessarily such great implementation or execution. And we miss sometimes those teachable moments. We miss those everyday experiences where we can be teaching kids about money. So apart from helping kids to set up their own business and run their own business, what other tips would you have for adults who want to help the kids in their lives build good money decision-making skills to become knowledgeable about money, but they're not sure how to go about that?
I think the first thing that's very hard for some people is to accept that you don't have to have all the answers with money and you don't have to be good with money. Now, for anyone who was listening, then you probably heard my, inverted commas around good, this perception of there's a right way and a wrong way. And that's pretty loose, to be honest. There's only a few rules. And so even people who are good with those rules sometimes get them wrong. My point is, don't beat yourself up over it. You don't have to have all the answers, but you do need to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I couple those together, because I often say to people, oh, you need to talk about it. But people go, but what do I say? I don't know how to talk about it. I think I'm bad with money. Doesn't matter. I mean, I wouldn't advise you to say you're bad with money in front of your kids, but you can say, I'm learning, I'm trying, I'm experimenting. I thought I'd attempt this. What do you think? But getting them to hear your thinking around it, because so much of that happens behind the closed doors of the parents' bedroom. It doesn't happen around the dinner table. And I think part of that as well is getting comfortable with kids asking financial questions. So, for example, we had a play date yesterday. My daughter, who is 10, brought a friend home. Her dad works in mining. My husband works in mining. And the girl asked, how much does your dad earn each week? Right. Which most people would cringe, right? Like absolutely cringe. Be like, you don't ask that. Oh, it's so rude. But of course, there's me in the front seat driving the kids. So we launched into a discussion of, oh, well, he does this kind of job. The average pay for that is around, $3,000 a week. So sort of that ballpark, probably my husband's going to be delighted about me disclosing these sorts of things, but this is pretty public knowledge, this how much do people get paid for certain roles. And she's going, oh yeah, I think my dad's about that. I think he might be $3,500 a week, something like that. So she was, mentally trying to compare, not for the sake of who's got the better house or who's got the better car, but trying to understand what that money translates to. So I don't fear that with kids. I don't hear those questions and go, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. And I hope her mum, if she ever listens to this, isn't worried about this. I love those questions.
Yeah.
And so I think getting kids comfortable asking them and teaching them to ask them in a respectful way if you're worried. So if you're like, oh my God, that's cringy, you go, can you teach your child to preface it with, is it okay if I ask about this? And it's okay if you don't tell me, like, you don't have to tell me, so you can couch these things in a way that makes them more socially palatable, particularly for older people who cringe at that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But encouraging that curiosity and talking about it, don't shy away from it. Don't have that. If you had that gut reaction, I bet you there's people who heard this and went, oh, I hate it when my kid does that, or that would really upset me. That is a sign to you that you have absorbed the taboo. Mm-hmm. It is a taboo. People would rather talk about their sex life than talk about their money sometimes, which just blows my mind. But that's because I had a family that talked about it. We talked about it all the time. We understood, how money was spent, how we made decisions. And we had to, because my mum was a single parent with not a lot of money for a long time. So there were lots of trade-offs. So when I went to, high school studying economics and we were learning about opportunity cost, I had a million examples in my head already of what that looks like. It just made total sense to me. So if you can help your kids relate those experiences to their personal experience, they're going to get so much more out of the learning they're going to get in school. That's how I think about it. So my second tip would, of course, be allowing them to make mistakes. Now, it's very tempting for us to intervene when we see our kids making poor financial choices or things that we would call poor financial choices. Examples of, wasting money on crappy plastic toys, that kind of thing. There's lots of stuff I'm sure that your kids, maybe it's online gaming and buying a virtual outfit or gun. Something that has completely passed me by because I'm not a gamer. But I hear these things from other parents. And of course, there's this discussion then about that's a bad thing to spend money on, or we can't afford it. Now, firstly, there is no rule about what's good to spend money on aside from don't spend money you don't have, right? Don't get into debt over it, especially consumer debt. That's the only real rule there. But that is a personal decision about priorities. So when you say to them, that's a bad thing to spend money on, it's more about, okay, well, you had a choice between spending on this or that, and you chose that, and that's the payoff, right? So letting them make those mistakes and have those experiences, and when they go, well, now I also want these clothes, you go, oh, well, it's a shame you spent that money on that thing. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
That is a really powerful experience for kids. And with your language, trying not to use the phrase we can't afford it is the same thing, because most things that kids ask for, you could afford. Now, you can't probably afford a Ferrari. You might not be able to afford a mansion on the hill. But when they say, I want that gaming machine, if you go, I can't afford it, you go, actually, no, you could afford it, but you have prioritized your finances differently. That's not a good use of our money. That's not the most effective way we could spend money. It is far more powerful for a kid to understand that this is a trade-off and we're having a discussion. So I think allowing them to find those values, allowing them to make those mistakes, and then using it as a teaching experience is really important. And then just don't miss an opportunity for a chance to do it in real life. Give them real money. Let them make decisions. You know, my kids are going to get a budget this school holidays. They're going to get some cash. You watch my youngest will go and buy Lego with it in day one. My eldest,
Lego is an investment. Let's put that on the record. Well, Lego is an investment.
It's certainly an investment in my household in peace and quiet and happiness. So I'm fine with it. But that he literally sees every dollar as how much Lego can I buy with that. I made the mistake of showing him his savings account, and then I'm not showing it to him again because he literally was like, I could buy that one and that one and that one. So now we're having discussions about what that money is set aside for. Yes, you get other money that you can spend on Lego. So there's lots of opportunities to talk about it. Whereas my eldest, we'll get to the end of school holidays, she'll still have at least half of what I've given her. She won't have spent it all because she will have thought about it and she will have planned it out. And she would have gone, no, I don't need to buy that. I've got this at home. And she'll probably save it. And so that opportunity for them to express that and to learn that, and for my son to get to the end of the school holidays and see my daughter with more money and be like, how come she's still got money? I'm like, well, she doesn't have a pile of Lego. That kind of thing is, those opportunities are so helpful for kids, that experiential learning. Now, I'll make the point of they won't be given cash. I've said this before. It ain't about the cash. People get so fixated on, but it's because we don't have cash anymore. No, it does. Something tangible helps. Right? So connecting to your brain, but a tracking chart on the fridge with some dots on it, or a little accounts book where you write your balance, do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. You do not need to have cash to teach kids about money. So I guess that's my final tip there. I'm very ranty about that, but it really annoys me when everyone goes, it's a problem of cash. No, mate, we're not going to go back
tangibility.
to cash. Yeah,
it's the
tangibility
that connects the brain that's the key.
And the hand.
Yes.
Exactly. And so if it goes through your brain and through your hand, you remember it. Don't just do it on a computer keyboard. Don't do it on your phone. Write it down somewhere if that's what's worrying you, but don't use this, there's no cash around anymore, as an excuse, because that's not the limiting factor. It's how do you make it real and visual for them.
Especially because we know that with the psychology of the brain, that where there is that tangibility and that physicality and that, particularly one of the things about spending cash, but it's, as you said, it's not just cash. It comes into any kind of physical transaction. There is that sense of loss. It actually connects with the science of our brain differently. So we feel the pain when we spend cash, or we see our account drop, or we have to write that in the book, which we actually get a dopamine hit when we're doing it online. It's actually taps into our pleasure systems, right? And we go, oh, I like that. I'll do that more. The same reason why people will often get caught in addictive patterns of behavior as well, because it's the way our pain and pleasure is processed in our brain, and it comes down to that tangibility, as you said, that we need that tangibility. It is quite interesting though when you do give kids space to make choices, and as you said, even if we personally wouldn't choose that, it's about that autonomy and that independence and helping them with the process of the decision making.
Exactly.
And I think
understanding their values and their priorities, because they're all different. If my son wants Lego, he can have Lego. He just can't have Lego and all the craft stuff that my daughter's going to buy. He's got to pick. That's how I think about it.
Opportunity cost. You have to give up something to have that. That's a really important lesson. I want to talk with you about the gender pocket money pay gap. And we know that we have the gender pay gap right around the world. In Australia, the national gender pay gap, as measured by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, sits at about 13. And if we use the figures from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, the total remuneration gender pay gap, which takes into all remuneration forms, is actually larger at 22.8%. But the gender pay gap actually starts with pocket money, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. The big challenge, I think, around this discussion is the understanding of equality versus equity, right? So that's the first thing, I think, what's going to become an equitable outcome. And to understand that, you have to understand our internalized biases that we all have. So even you and I, Jenny, people who think about this stuff, we care about this stuff, we take deliberate action to try and improve it. We have, like if you did the implicit association test on Harvard, we would associate women more with household chores and men more with business. It's this ingrained result of society. And we've operated that way for thousands of years. And so knowing that we have these biases, we have to be very proactive. but we see it play out everywhere. And like you say, with pocket money in a primary school,
Yes.
sub 10 years old, girls are getting paid less than boys on average. Now,
Yes.
there will be lots of people who dive into that with an opinion about, it's because of this or that. Look, there's absolutely no justifiable reason to pay boys more than girls as pocket money. There just isn't. Like at that age, they're all in primary school. Like, no, there's nothing. There's no reason for that. And so I think that just points to when you have bias, these outcomes are a result. So you have to be very conscious about taking that bias out everywhere you can. But we see that play out through their whole lives, when they're graduates. Doesn't matter how educated you are. Like that gender pay gap happens at graduate level before they've got work experience that would differentiate them.
It sure
There's
does.
a lot of research, on it. It is an inherent human thing. Now, everyone who goes, it's because women choose to stay at home, or they want more admin jobs, or they don't want to do the work that's risky, that is also BS, unfortunately, on average. But people have internalized these messages because they've heard them all the time. They've heard them in the government. They've heard them in their families. They've heard them in their workplaces. So it's no surprise that it's still there. I think the work to close those gaps, it just tells you that it's got to be done everywhere. It's got to be done by parents at home. It's got to be done by people in schools. It's got to be done by workplaces. It's got to be done in universities. And you can't let up. You can't just go, we're there now, because those biases are part of culture. And it's going to take, I don't know how many years, could be 50 or 100 years to undo the mental stuff. Like, never mind the closing of the gaps. How are we going to undo these mental models that we have of the role of women versus the role of men, and how we value the different work that they do on average, and valuing them through how we pay them pocket money? But yeah, the pocket money, I think, although it makes me very angry, I just see it as a logical consequence of people not understanding their biases and then actively managing them. That's how I think about it.
Parents and carers aren't going to intentionally do this. It is interesting why it happens. The fact that even at a young age, we tend to, because of those gender stereotypes, the types of jobs, if we're paying pocket money in return for jobs, we know from the research that we tend to give boys the heavy lifting outside jobs, even though they might be 10 and physiologically no different to the girls. Girls, we tend to give those domestic jobs, caring for siblings, cleaning up, and we value that work differently, which is really quite fascinating. Because who has taught us that? You're right. It comes from those unconscious biases that we have. And it highlights that when we're talking about closing the gender pay gap, it's not simply about the money and what people get paid. It is addressing those underlying gender stereotypes that have been created by society and then continued through society, often unconsciously, subconsciously. And it shapes so much of our thinking. It shapes, as you said, the way we value work. And that's also interesting because we know that children that have a better awareness of what the adults around them do for work tend to have more confidence about occupational choices and also have more confidence about their decisions around money. So where children have an understanding of their parents or carers or other significant adults, what education they've had, what careers they have, what jobs they do, as you said, knowing what different roles play, they tend to report higher levels of self-confidence than those that don't. And interestingly, we often tend to have those conversations with boys more than we do with girls, which is fascinating, I think. Because nobody would intentionally do that, right?
No, we wouldn't. We would not create a world if you had we've both got children of, I've got a girl and a boy, right? You wouldn't never want to create a world where one gets treated differently, but it's what we're all part of, and we do it when we're unconscious with these things. We don't catch them. We do it, and it's everywhere, and it's pervasive, and people get away with it. I'm currently absolutely up in arms about some research that came out in August from ANU and Curtin University that found in science curriculums across Australia, so year 11 and 12 curricula for the sciences that are offered. They looked at 4 subjects. And their textbooks, 145 individual mentions of scientists, and only one of them was a woman. And where I sit in Western Australia, if you did a year 11 and 12 science and you're graduating this term, you would have seen none, not a single female scientist mentioned. And this is this unchecked bias. We know it exists. We have to have systems in place to avoid it. We have to take responsibility when we find it and fix it. So at the moment, I hope every educator I know understands that if I hear them talk about promoting STEM to high school students, especially for females, that I'm probably going to call them a hypocrite if they haven't fixed that yet. But once you know about it and you see it, you can do something about it. So that's where I think if you haven't thought about it as a parent, or you haven't, sort of checked in with yourself to think about how you talk about money, how you talk about roles, how you divide up that labor, what jobs you give your children, this is just a little reminder to maybe do a bit of an audit. How are you doing that at the moment? Do you think it's fair? And whether you can find a way to maybe try and train that bias out as much as you can.
Becoming conscious of our own biases, our own heuristics, the subconscious thinking patterns that help us cope with all of the information that's in the world, because we know that we need those in order to make decisions, because otherwise we'd be overwhelmed by the information. But being at least aware that those biases exist and to think, where have they come from and are they accurate? We see the ongoing impact of unconscious biases in financial decision-making. We often think we are much better with money than we actually are, and we make decisions on rational basis, and yet the research shows we don't. There are, sunk cost fallacies and all sorts of loss aversion biases, things that influence what we do with money and why we do those things. But becoming aware of those biases, and particularly in terms of that gender lens that we bring, that has no basis in biology and has everything to do with socialization. It's our messaging that we're giving to the kids. Learn from a very young age about gender stereotypes and what is and isn't acceptable. Have you seen the TED Talk about fangirls?
I think I might have seen that one. Fangirls are seen to be crazy and not serious, whereas male fans are seen to be like dedicated.
They can cry at sport because it's sport and they're passionate, and that's okay. In the TEDx talk about fangirls, the speaker references research that shows that from the age of 4, boys learn to control their vocalization. They're taught not to scream and screech because they're told that that's not manly. So boys are learning at age 4 these behaviours that they're expected to demonstrate and to eschew any of those feminine kind of traits. They learn that, whereas girls when they hit 10, 11, 12 still have that vocal range because nobody's ever told them to stop shrieking like a girl, because you're allowed to shriek like a girl if you're a girl. And so the language and the messaging that we give is so overwhelming that kids learn really quickly about what is and isn't acceptable. But it's not inherently biological. It's what our society associates with that gender.
But you're right, it's everywhere. And where it comes back to money, and it drives me nuts, is girls apparently start saying they're bad at maths around the age of 7.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not. There's nothing wrong with them. I have this argument with heaps of girls, and I certainly have had it with lots of my friends' children over time, where they'll go, I'm bad at maths. And I'll say, are you good at dancing? Are you good at music? Are you good at art? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'm like, you can't be good at those things without understanding patterns. And patterns is what maths is at your age.
Yes.
So you, by being a good dancer, good artist, are good at maths. And they go, what? I'm like, yeah, it's all patterns. It's all rhythms. That's what maths is at your age. You are good at maths by definition if you're good at those things. And you watch them get taller and go, really? Oh, so I'm good at maths? You are absolutely good at maths. If you can dance to a rhythm, if you can construct something that is appealing to the eye, any of those things, you can't do that without understanding proportion, without understanding pattern, without understanding, therefore, ratios.
Yes.
This is really important. So that is a maths skill embodied in a different way. And they go, oh, so that's how I have started I don't know if it's going to be helpful. Hopefully these girls listen to me over time. But that is me trying to combat this whole I'm bad at maths, which girls pick up at 7, which
Yes.
so many people then associate with financial skills. Now, that's why I spend so much time saying, look, the maths bit's the easy, this stuff's not hard. That's not what makes people good at money. It's not. It's the ability to understand trade-offs, and it's the ability to apply their values and ethics consistently. The maths bit's tiny. Like these people that go, well, I'm bad at maths as a kid. They get into high school. I don't want to do maths. Therefore, I'm going to be bad with money. You are not bad with money. Even if you do suck at maths, and you probably don't suck at maths. You probably just absorb that message somewhere. If you can get through year 5 maths, you're good. You'll be fine with money. There's nothing more you need. And so, like, bluntly, it's got to be something that's coming from the classroom as well. And that's awful. I'm sure there'll be lots of teachers and educators who are up in arms, and I'll go and look at that research about your science curriculum and textbooks and tell me you have absolutely proven to no doubt that you have completely removed any gender bias from all of your teaching. I won't believe it until I've seen it after seeing that result. I'm so furious. I couldn't understand how anyone could claim to be promoting STEM science and stuff for high school girls and have that result. It is literally this incredible cognitive dissonance that must be happening. So that's why when I hear that for young kids, you are obviously, at home you can do all the right things, but they are starting to learn in an environment from kindy, even in daycare, because, education happens at daycare as well. Those biases, if they're built into year 12 science, built in, that's a choice they made or an absence of a choice because they didn't prioritize it. I bet you there's stuff earlier in the curriculum. And if it's not in the curriculum, it'll be coming from some of the messages they're getting from educators. And it's little tiny things, and it's unintentional. I've had a discussion. We've recently changed schools. My children came home recently saying, I got this, thing that's a good thing. They call it a gold slip. So I'm a good person. I went, what? Sorry? No, you've behaved well. You're not a good person because of these things. You have behaved well. Like, I wonder where they've got that from. They've never had that before. And I was sitting outside the school pickup and a teacher walked past with the line of the kids returning them to their classroom. And I had a little child at the front, I think they might have been like year 1, say, there's been lots of well-behaved children in the class today. Surely we get some we get some gold slips today. And the teacher went, yes, there's been some very good people today. Like, it talked about the person, not the behaviour. Wow. That is how it happens. That is how it's these little tiny things. Now, that teacher was on the older end of the spectrum. She doesn't mean anything bad by it. She's not intentionally being naughty. She's not trying to create that.
No.
But her biases that associate a behavior with a person, and that means these kids come out thinking I'm a good kid or I'm a bad kid. Like, we didn't have that at the other school that we were at. That was not that that language would never have been used at the other school. That is the language that is used at the school we're at now. Now, that's a cultural individual person. I would bet that the principal and vice principals would not say that that's how we do things. They probably go, that's not how it's supposed to happen. We don't know. We tell them it's about behaviour. But that's the message that's coming through. So I am spending time as a parent trying to undo that. And that's what I mean by it's little tiny pervasive things. There's little seeds planted in those very fresh, fertile minds. It can be a throwaway comment. It can be, if you think back to your childhood, there might be one pivotal, like I can remember one teacher really embarrassing me one time, and I had real issues with that, or a parent said something about my ugly feet, and so I wore closed shoes for 6 years. Those little tiny things that blow out of proportion in a child's mind, I think that's my hypothesis. The education people will probably be going, that's not true, but I'll be like, look at your science curriculum and now prove it to me because I don't believe you anymore. That's where I come from. I sound quite cynical.
With regard to the science curriculum, are we really that surprised that there is only one, or sometimes no, women included in the curriculum when we know there is the phenomenon in science, in the industry, of the Matilda effect? And the Matilda effect being essentially that there are women who have made amazing achievements, who have worked on incredible advances, and generally speaking, men take the credit for that work. So the advances and the achievements and the innovations are attributed to men rather than women who have actually discovered those things. And that is the Matilda effect. So we see that not just in science, of course, but in a whole raft of areas. But that must flow through into the industry, into then the decision-making of those in industries, and then the decision-making of educators.
Exactly. It's everywhere. I think that Matilda effect does explain a lot. And I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in this to go and look at the research that I referred to, which was done by Dr. Kat Ross, and her tag is AstroCat on everything because she's an astrophysicist. So go and have a look at that research, because she proposes a few things that are wrong with the way we teach science and the long-term fixes. And that is the pervasive way that we teach science, which has been shown to be inaccurate and very biased, which is in a chronological order. We teach it in the way that it was discovered. And it always looks like this lone male genius. It's like Edison discovered that and Bohr's discovered that. And it looks like this one random dude in a lab beavering away and has an aha moment. And, we now know about atoms. That sort of stuff. That's how it's taught. So it's not just that it's men. It's this idea of this progression. Right. And you're exactly right. The research also found that, you always attribute, it's always a, surname of first person who is the researcher et al. Right. And that first person is almost always a bloke. I saw a really good example recently of someone applying the include her concept, which is a hashtag you can follow, include her, which was about when they were looking at manifestation and how that actually means you're more likely to go bankrupt. And the professor who had done that research was a male. So it gets attributed to him, as someone at Al. But everything that he has commented on, he has included his female research partner. Now, for whatever reason that they have these, what order you get put in, it comes under his name. But everything he says, everything he comments on, every media article, every social media thing, he always says her name as well, always includes it. And so that change of behavior into how do we then start to do that that needs to happen. And there's another one that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm just going to mention it briefly. There's a great article recently, which people should Google, which was about cervical cancer and the discovery about how pap smears came about. Now, I want you to consider this. The guy who invented the pap smear and everything, it's a bloke, right, and did that. But his wife had a pap smear every day for more than 20 years so that we could track how cells change. Now, who deserves the credit in that scenario? These unsung heroes, right? So everything from being the unsung hero to the person who actually did the research and then a man took credit for it, that is everywhere. And until we make a real effort to undo that, it's just going to continue.
She was a scientist too, wasn't she?
Yeah. She helped in the lab. And think about all the things that she did to enable him to be able to do that research as well, because she was still doing the traditional, housewifey thing from the sounds of it, from what I read. But the point being that there is no lone male genius who's just sitting there with no one supporting him. It's the same argument I have with people whenever, you see what you might call an old-fashioned arrangement where the man's off working, the woman's at home looking after the kids. They go to get divorced and then everyone goes, yeah, but the superannuation's his money. Or that's his money. He earned that. No. He earned that because she ran the house and did all the things that were required to look after the family. That is a team effort, but it's how we perceive it and where we assign value. All those things, like what kind of effort we see as being, contributing to the outcome. And so that perception doesn't surprise me. I'm not surprised, I'm just disappointed face on.
It's similar to Anna Founder's book Wifedom, which explores George Orwell and his wife. Have you heard of that at all?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, you have to read this book. So Wifedom by Anna Founder looks at the contributions that George Orwell's wife made to his work in terms of enabling him to create the works that he did, but also the practical side of what she contributed, and it's never acknowledged. And I think it is a must-read book to really illustrate the way that the contributions of women are often dismissed as being inferior, and yet without them, the achievements that have been made or the outcomes couldn't have actually been the outcomes couldn't have been achieved had it not been for the contribution of the woman.
Exactly,
and
that team.
That gets overlooked continually.
Exactly. And so that pedagogy is there in science and everything. I feel like
it's in everything.
It's in the science curriculum, it's probably everywhere else. So we've got to get rid of that.
Do we have enough social science? Do we have enough human behaviour? Do we have enough values education embedded in financial education in schools, or do we need more?
Australia's an excellent case study for how not to do it right. Sorry, Australia. We put financial literacy mostly into maths, but also into business and economics with the maths view as well, but all that stuff.
Yes.
We did that
Yes.
in 2011. Last time they assessed our financial literacy on the International PISA test, we've gone 6 months backwards from where we started when we first did that. Our children are less financially literate. So whenever I point that out, when everyone's like, yeah, they're putting financial education in schools as compulsory, I'm like, it's not about the teaching points. It's about the delivery. It's about how you link it to real life, and it's about it being reinforced at home. There's no point teaching kids how to eat healthy at school and then sending them home to take away dinner every night, you know? That's one part of it, right? There's got to be stuff at home as well. We can't abdicate responsibility. Second of all, it's got to be real. Now, I'm very interested because South Australia has recently announced a fantastic program where they're putting much more money stuff in the curriculum. I want to know how they're taking the load off teachers so that they can find the time to skill up on this stuff so they can deliver it well. Because that is the message across all of it. Not only has financial literacy declined, literacy has declined, numeracy has declined. Everything's getting harder because of the admin burden that we put on our teachers and the troublesome parents they have to deal with bluntly, and the expectations for their time. There's this idea that you're going to change this one thing and that it's going to improve everything. Look, it's worth a shot. Is it the best use of our resources? Is it a silver bullet? No. And people who promote it as that, it is a lack of systems understanding. They don't understand how the whole system fits together to incentivize people to spend more than they earn, get them into debt, the pervasive nature of that being everywhere, and how it's becoming frictionless, how it's becoming more accessible, and it's not regulated enough. So there's all that system stuff that I think if you fix those things and didn't have education, you would see a bigger impact than if you only fixed education and didn't fix the systems thing. So that's why whenever someone in financial education talks to me about this, they often walk away pretty unhappy with me because we all want the answer to be, just teach them. But that personal responsibility myth is pervasive in personal finance. It's very unreasonable. So I'll be interested to see what the South Australian curriculum outcomes are and whether they put all the necessary support, all the link to real life, whether the parents feel like they've got the ability to talk about it at home, to see whether you actually get a change. Because again, I'm glad, like we probably need both. You need to do both things. People need to learn. But do we think we're going to get the biggest impact there? I think it's going to be on regulation and systemic change. I make myself unpopular with all sorts of groups. I make myself very unpopular with parents as well, where I'm like, this is why you can't leave it to schools. This has to be reinforced and in fact possibly based at home and supported by schools. It's this we've got to do it as a team and it's got to be repetitive. And that 100 small things is much more powerful then I'm going to, it's what I often say to parents, you're not going to sit down and give your child a lecture for 2 hours and be like, right, that's financial education done, see you later. It's going to be every day, every week. You're going to be doing this for years. The same way you have to tell your kid 1,000 times, what do we say? Thank you. It's exactly the same. Repetition is essential and practice is essential. And that's the thing I think that's really hard with schools is very limited opportunity to practice the application of money because you shouldn't at school, apart from like canteen or buying books or whatever. There's not a lot of opportunity for kids to practice that. It's all hypothetical. You have to have that practical at home. I feel like there's a lot there that has to be done to build that support up and to make it, effective. We're just not effective if we only do the theory.
Thank you so much, Lacey. It has been so much fun to talk about the things that we can do to really make a difference in the lives of people and especially for the next generation coming through.
I have loved it, Jenny. Thank you so much for the opportunity.